guys, welcome back to another video. Merry Christmas. We got Charles, the mono white guy. It is a white Christmas. What's up, Charles? How you doing, buddy?
Hey Josh, I'm doing well.
Cool, that's awesome. So I'm gonna do a mini series starting today. Obviously, if you read the title, I'm gonna do every color, every video. There's gonna be a color and why the color's good and why you play the color and yada yada yada. And we have no one better than the mono white guy on the white Christmas. So let's get into it, man. I'm very familiar with you. You're one of the best CDH players that I know. I would love to get in your background. When did you get into Magic? Kind of what set you started? How'd you get into CDH and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I got into Magic at the end of the Fifth Dawn. So that sounds really cool to say. But Fifth Dawn was a set from the original Mirrodin block. So OG Mirrodin was Mirrodin, Darksteel, and Fifth Dawn. I came in right as Fifth Dawn was ending and at the beginning of Champions of Kamigawa. So Kamigawa is like one of my favorite sets. It was also one of the worst sets that Magic has printed. But it was very nostalgic for a lot of people and had a lot of legends in it. And so immediately I kind of gravitated more towards like playing Commander because of that reason. There were a lot of really cool legends that you can take from Kamigawa that you would then build into a Commander deck. And at the time you had things like Azusa, Azami, Kiki-Jiki, like were some of like the big three.
Wow.
That you even still see today, and that was all from like the original Kamigawa set.
What year was that?
That was, I think, 2004.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 2004.
That's
so
cool.
around that time. So I've been playing for like 20 years, essentially.
Wow. You look 20.
So-
That's crazy.
I'm a lot older than 20.
That's funny.
Yeah. I was in high school around that time. So
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I had a great mentor to teach me how to play Magic. He was around my age at the time. We were both in high school, and he was someone that Sam Black actually knew back then. Sam Black was also kind of like a just typical type of grinder. I actually ran into Sam Black like a couple years back, and I told him who had taught me how to play Magic, and he was like, "Yeah, you had a really good teacher." So I was kind of like fast tracked into competitive Magic. Like after year one, I was already playing in like regionals and things like that.
Wow, so like a prodigy.
Well, I wouldn't call myself a prodigy. I just think, again, I had a really great teacher. Like our math teacher in high school was actually like one of the original founders of the MIT Blackjack team and things like that.
Wow.
And we did a lot of card counting and practicing with like poker and things like that. And applying like that type of knowledge in terms of like not only attacking from just like the idea of playing the game, but also playing like the meta game and understanding like how tiebreakers work and how to position yourself to winning the game outside of the game as well. And yeah, we had formed teams and stuff like that when we took on tournaments. Magic was also at a very weird stage in its time. It was being marketed as a competitive card game. Like you had those MTV commercials back then of people playing like card games on yachts, and you had like, this is also back in the days. So I realize like some of your audience might not even remember this because they were born after this. But back in the day, like video games were targeted towards the male gaze, and so you had a lot of like models and women who didn't even play games or anything like that. They were just there to like paid to look pretty by these companies and stuff like that. And Magic had the same type of thing where it was like, hey, all the cool guys play Magic, they get all the girls kind of thing, and look at all this money, look at all this like clout and things like that. And the reason why I'm explaining this is because I'm setting the scene towards like what Magic was like back then was because it was mostly competitively oriented and it was a financial flop.
Right.
Because today you see a lot of games focused on the fun factor and co-op play because honestly companies make a lot of money doing that. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is because at the time there were a lot of other card games emerging out of the woodwork, and they weren't like Hearthstone, which was like Hearthstone's like an RNG type of game. The games back then were more focused on, hey, show off your skills and stuff like that. And so I also played those card games as well. So one of the famous ones back then was called the Spoils, which if anyone had Dragon Shield sleeves, if you had any of the old boxes of Dragon Shield, it advertised a card game called The Spoils, and back then they were so aggressive on their advertising. They gave away like 1.5k in cash prizes every tournament that you went to, and they hosted one every weekend.
Wow.
So yeah, and I made a killing when I was in high school back then. I actually had to like fill out a tax form and all that stuff as a
Really?
kid. Yeah, I got my Power 9 pieces from that actually.
No way.
Yeah, yeah. And the game was consulted by John Finkel. So, and it had a lot of the mechanics that you would see. So, like, for example, the Spoils had this thing where you could pay 4 mana to, to put a card from your hand face down as a land, right? And it can tap for any like resource or mana or whatever. But you can also pay 3 mana to draw a card, which is very emblematic to how Thrasios works today, right? And so there were a lot of like analogs to like what we see in Magic's game design today that the Spoils also had. And I study a lot of different card games like Wild TCG, Versus Systems, and things like that. So that's where a lot of like my knowledge in card games came from. And yeah, I mean, I also follow the traditional pipeline of Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, into Magic as well. So prior to me picking up Magic, I played those card games as well. So I had a lot of games to study from, and I was, in that type of competitive environment where people were very serious about like winning and making money and all that.
Okay. Yeah, because the modern day, a lot of people, they love Commander and don't like 60 card, and they love casual Commander, and then from casual Commander they get into CEDH. And I feel like that's not really a good way to get into CEDH because you have that casual mindset. What I like is when I get my 60 card friends into CEDH and they're like, oh, this is like Modern and Legacy, but like way worse.
Yeah, it's way worse. I think both ways are very difficult. Commander's CDH is kind of like its own breed, and I agree with you. But I don't think it's only the mindset. I think that CDH applies certain fundamentals from 60 card and 40 card limited actually that you just can't learn when you play casual Commander because it forgoes any of that aspect. Then 60 card competitive players also kind of suffer playing CDH because there's a multiplayer game theory fundamental that they are missing out on.
Yeah, it's not even close. Yeah, it's like I was talking to my buddy. He's talking about sideboarding and RCQs and stuff like that. I'm like, well, we don't really sideboard. We kind of have pre-games. That's kind of our sideboard. You kind of know what people are playing. So I'm trying to get him to CDH, and he can't wrap his head around it. And he's like, what? What do you mean pre-games? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it's really hard because, like, if I were to explain CDH, it really has to depend on who I'm explaining it to. Because if I'm explaining it to a 60-card competitive player, right, I would explain it very differently than I would to a casual player about, like, the appeal of CDH. And not even just the appeal, but sort of, like, how it gets played. Because I do play Commander casually. So I've moved on from being a... So I think, like, after college... I stopped being like a competitive tryhard and became really more casual and relaxed about things. And actually learning to think about Commander from a casual perspective, I think is very, very hard. And honestly, I think it's more rewarding, to be honest. I think that when you play hyper competitively, you can get very burnt out. And I have like my own personal philosophies about competitive playing that like, honestly... I played so many games competitively that it gets to a certain point where it just feels like you're playing on a spreadsheet, and you're repeating the same functions over and over. And so if you can't find the game relatable to you and you're only really doing this for the money, you have spent a lot of brain power on something that you honestly could have just applied it to a paying job.
Right.
Yeah.
I notice all the other TCG like I play, I don't really like. I always end up going back to Magic. Like my brother taught me how to play My Hero, and I'm like, this is like Magic but worse. Oh, okay. Let me play Pokemon again. Oh, this is not even close to. I'm not having fun a little bit, right? Oh, okay, play this game or play that game, and was it One Piece? One of the Flesh and Blood or One Piece. One of those games are kind of like Magic with mana, and then you have this, and this is your mana. And I'm like, I'll just play Magic. Like that's all I want to play. I don't play 60 card. Speaking of that, I just want to say something. I'm gonna post this on Christmas, so he's already gonna see it. I'm working on a power cube for my brother, 360 card power cube, and I haven't played it yet. But this is the hardest thing I've ever done in Magic. But I feel like besides CDH, this is going to be a lot of fun. And I
Yes.
want to get all my CDH players into this because it's like, you name it, the best cards in Magic ever are in this. Like Power 9, you name it, all the crazy combos, but it's, I made it a lot of synergistic and interaction. So a lot of people are like, ew, I'm not touching Legacy or I'm not touching CDH. And I realized this cube, this can kind of bring everybody together because, like you said, a lot of CDH players are the modern day. Like, people are like, what, 2004? I started in 2020. Like me. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I was bored with COVID, so I picked up these cards and then I play Spell Table. And then it's like, you talk to someone like you, or my brother's been playing since 93, 94, and it's like, I remember everything. So I'm making a cube, and I'm like, okay, I guess this is probably a format that's not CDH I could definitely play.
Yeah, making a cube is hard.
Oh,
So
man.
it's very commendable.
I
for you
have
to
put
try.
a lot.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, this is the hardest thing I've ever done in Magic.
Yeah.
Like,
It's a great way of testing your game design knowledge, actually, of like
Yeah.
how to make it fair and balanced.
Yeah.
What's too powerful, and oftentimes you come in with very preconceived notions
Yeah.
about like what is powerful based on how you have played the game. But now
That's
you're
the
building
thing.
multiple archetypes.
I don't really play 60 card, right? So
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like,
Mhm.
this combo's good? Like, what? So I kind of did my research and I broke it down and I found a really, really good cube. And I took out the bad cards and I put in the cards from my brother. So he's a big Magda player, so I put in some Magda cards. I put in his favorite cards. His name is Twitch, so I put in the card Twitch. So I kind of made it's going to be his cube, and it's really, really cool.
Awesome.
But anyways, so while we're here, let's talk about whites. If I could rank white, I would probably rank it the third best color in Magic. That's just me. You're the mono white guy. So the big question, why white?
Okay, yeah. So I actually started playing all 5 colors. So
Okay.
I played. So my first deck ever was actually a 5-color pre-com that I had back in the day. Because Fifth Dawn was actually a 5-color set. This whole mechanic was like the creatures are big based on how many. It was similar to like Domain, how many different colors of mana you spent to like play them, and I played all 5 colors.
Domain
My
is
first
crazy.
commander. Yeah, my first commander deck was actually Scion of the Ur-Dragon as well.
I
So,
love
like,
that. Let's go.
yeah, almost anything that I played, I usually start with playing everything, and then I focus in on and hone down on like one thing that I really like doing. And that came more from like just experience afterwards, because after playing like so many other games, right, you start picking up like tangential mechanics. Like, this game is like this game, and like these archetypes are like these archetypes. Like, if you like, for example, picked up Hearthstone, the Paladin class is very similar to like white itself, and then you have like Priest, which was like very similar to like Esper Control or something like that, right? But like you could do like Pokemon as well, like Pokemon TCG, very similar thing where you have like I'm thinking of like the Gym Leader Challenge decks.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do like whole damage over time thing, and that's like similar to like Rakdos, like burn, where you're doing like damage over time using or like Black White Aristocrats as well, right? And I'm thinking like damage over time, like Mana Barb effects and all that stuff.
Ugh.
So yeah, I mean, like a lot of card games have a very similar DNA, and so I found a style that I really like playing. White was very interesting because it was actually the last color that I learned to, I guess, like quote unquote master. I don't think you're really a master at anything. It's always like a shifting goalpost.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I was leaving. I was actually quitting Magic around this time, and I had sold most of my collection. And I kept only the white cards because I was thinking more like a casual player at that point, and I was just thinking like, what did I like? And I really liked the white cards because actually of the flavor text. I was going through like a very difficult time around that time, and a lot of the flavor text was like very like resonated a lot with that healing process that I was going through. And I built a deck to express that thought or sentiment, and it was like a casual deck. It turned out to be a CDH deck. I didn't know that. Well, it was because like one of the cards that I ran had like the flavor text like "Let moss grow over gargoyles," which was translates to like "Forget painful memories" or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's actually the flavor text for Stony Silence. And it was the first time that I had played an effect like Stony Silence that I realized, holy crap, this card is really powerful.
Yeah.
Right.
Still
And
is.
yeah. And so like so many cards that I had thought were so powerful back in the day, like Skull Clamp or Isochron Scepter and Soul Ring. Like it never occurred to me that those were all activated abilities that Stony Silence would shut down. And then gradually, I built the deck more towards that, and I ended up building a mono white CDH stacks deck and learning about stacks for the first time, and then playing it and then applying every knowledge that I had of every other color that I had played before into playing it. And I loved that aspect about like playing white, because in many ways I felt like it was a test of how well you knew the rest of the game.
Right.
Right.
It's the hardest probably archetype is stacks. That's why people don't
Yeah.
play it, because it's hard.
Yeah, it's very hard. It tests a lot of your knowledge of how cards work. Like for example, like so I'll use a popular example, which is like Thalia, right? But like if you actually have to do the math on the spot in a game that you're playing, like if you only had 2 mana to spend because of like rule of law, right? And you could play like either Thalia or you could play like Suppression Field, right? Which taxes all activated abilities,
Oh.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, except for mana abilities, right? Nobody plays that card, by the way, except for like me, and I can explain why later. But like, if you could play like Thalia or Suppression Field, you then have to do this type of calculus. You have to look at everyone's decks, and you have to think about like which is the more effective stacks piece. One taxes the stack, right, with non-creature spells, but the other taxes permanents on the battlefield, right? And one of the so this is the other thing that I can get to later, but this goes on a like slightly separate tangent. But one of the things that I don't think players are aware of is how do they evaluate cards, and for a lot of players, they think only in terms of card advantage. Like this card gets me 2 more cards, right? So that's a good Magic card, especially especially if I only pay 1 mana for it or something like that, right? Like. How do you evaluate Rhystic Study, for example? Rhystic Study can get you like X cards, right? In a CDH game, or when you're like goldfishing, most people like have it in their mind, like how many cards Rhystic Study gets them,
Right.
like when they play test it.
Yeah.
Same goes for Mystic Remora. But then when you play test the stacks piece, it's really hard because you have no concept of how effective it is, because a good stacks piece will have it in such a way that you don't see anything that your opponent's doing. So you have no idea how much is stopping your opponent.
Besides, like,
right?
Drannith, right?
Yeah.
Drannith and Stony Silence is doing work. But yeah, I see what you're saying.
Well, like, even Drannith, like, your opponent might have Underworld Breach in their hand the entire time, and you don't know it because they can't play it while Drannith is out. You have no idea if your opponent is sandbagging cards that they can't play because Drannith is on the battlefield, right? There are like impulse effects in red that they could be playing that they're not playing because it's pointless to play it while Drannith is on the battlefield. Is an example. So a lot of times Stacks has this hidden value that you don't see. And the other thing is like essentially I don't necessarily play in terms of like card advantage. I don't evaluate card advantage as highly as other people do. The thing that I evaluate the most is actually tempo. And I think tempo is also very, very difficult to understand.
Yeah.
Because you don't have a good definition for tempo. I have a theory or an idea of what tempo means. And it's a working definition that I have, which is tempo is the measurement or distance between you and your opponents in terms of how far each of you guys are along in terms of your strategies. So in a 1v1 setting, right, we can just take a 1v1 setting. Let's say that I'm an aggro deck, right, and simple white weenies or mono red burn aggro, right, and it's 20 life system, right. That is the easiest way to measure tempo because it is literally how close are you to 0. Right. I have this many burn spells. I can count out how many turns it takes for me to burn you out with the cards in my hand, right? Classic Philosophy of Fire stuff, which is, for your audience, Philosophy of Fire is a theory that competitive players have, and it was originally created to study burn and how burn decks worked, but it's now being applied elsewhere to a lot of deck archetypes. There's a great article by Mike Flores that you can read, and other like old pro Magic players have written stuff about it, but there are other theories of card evaluation, and Philosophy of Fire is just one of them. Um, but basically, uh, that's how you measure tempo for a burn deck. But how would you measure tempo for like a combo deck? Like if I was a breach deck, right? Oftentimes, like for example, when someone plays Wheel of Fortune in CDH, oftentimes in our mind we think, oh, that's it, we've lost the game. They've resolved Wheel of Fortune. Well, why is that, right? If someone drew 7 cards off of Ristic Study, did they just win the game? Because that's how many cards you would draw off of Wheel of Fortune, you know? Right, and people don't necessarily see that, but it's easier to see when someone resolves Wheel of Fortune than it is to see, oh, Ristic has resolved 7 times and the person has drawn 7 cards.
I think it's a little different because your opponents are drawing 21 cards as well.
Yes, your opponents are drawing 21 cards aggregate total. I'm bringing this up more for the fact of the person who deliberately is playing Wheel because
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and same goes for like things like the One Ring. And so for a lot of like combo decks, it seems like tempo is evaluated by card velocity, which is another like value theory that people apply aside from card advantage, right? Why would we play like Faithless Looting over a like some simple like looting, some simple card draw effect like Divination, right? Both of them get you 2 cards, but Divination lets you keep the cards, whereas Faithless Looting requires you to discard 2 cards. And the theory behind that is partly with card velocity, which focuses on this idea of how many cards do I see in my deck, right? The deck that the theory or the overall paradigm of card velocity or the principle of card velocity is the more I see my deck, the more I get to play my deck. The more I see my deck, the more opportunities I have to win with my deck.
Right. That's why sitting behind a Ristic Study oftentimes wins you the game, because you're seeing more cards than your opponents.
Yeah, you are seeing, and that's the theory. And combine those two things together, you have both card advantage and card velocity. And that's how most, I think, CDH players tend to operate or think. But the principle of tempo is the idea of like, well, what if my opponent isn't operating on how many cards they see, but sort of how far along in their game plan they are.
Right, yeah. I always talk about the Cursed Totem effect, right? I don't mean to cut you off, but this is
no.
This is what you just said. Is I'm telling people, right? Like Kennen is probably one of the best decks in this format right now, 100%. But only a few people are winning with Kennen because it's really hard to play. So I'm like, okay, say you have a Cursed Totem in your hand. Would you slam a turn 1 Cursed Totem without knowing anything against a Kennen? Or do you wait for Kennen to set up a little bit, or a Cedh, let them set up their creatures and go all in on their plan, and then you slam a Cursed Totem, and then you just tempoed them way out of the game, and now they have to fall back from behind? That's kind of my idea of tempo, and I'm sure you can take it, but that's...
No, it's exactly that.
But I literally tell people all the time, I'm like, why would you cast a turn 1, turn 2 Cursed Totem? Let them cast their birds, their dorks, their Kennen, get a little bit of advantage. Then, well, the best thing is like Born Upon a Wind Cursed Totem, but or if you just turn 3, turn 4 Cursed Totem, and now they have to fight against it, you know what I'm saying? Like against the grain, instead of, oh, that's a Cursed Totem. Before I do this game plan, I need to get rid of that Cursed Totem and then do my thing. So I feel like the issue with stacks, we got a little way from white, but when you think of white, you think of stacks. With stacks is people don't know how to play stacks like you're saying. So what they do is they just play like a rule law effect. And nowadays, rule law effects aren't that good because people don't know how to play them. So it's just, I have this rule law, and then it's slowing everybody down, and then I'm doing whatever, and then it's one removal away, and then they would just win the game, right? Yeah. But like with you, like I think I heard you say it before, with you is, okay, you're going to play your rule law, and then now you have a Thalia, and you have like a Null Rod or whatever in your hand, a Stony Silence, and you're like, okay, if I play this, what affects them more? They can't just remove one thing from me, right? That's kind of how the tempo... That's why white is so good, because you can play those tempo pieces.
Yes, white is a... And yeah, this is sort of where I was getting at, is that evaluating white cards, if you're thinking in terms of card velocity and card advantage, it's a terrible color, because it doesn't really have those things. But what it's really good at is tempo. And
couldn't agree more.
Specifically with like those stack pieces, and playing it is very difficult then, because in order for you to play it, because it's different from red tempo. Red tempo is all about tempoing yourself faster than your opponent.
Right.
White tempo is about tempoing your opponents so that they're not faster than you.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like the idea that you're moving at a fixed rate, and red is like you have cards that can boost your rate, so you're moving faster.
Yeah.
Right. White doesn't necessarily boost its own rate of speed in terms of winning the game.
It slows the game down.
It slows the other. Yeah. And more more specifically, it's like think about like sort of like how white cards are designed. A lot of really good like white effects tend to what they do, because a lot of times people talk about breaking parity, and I feel like people misunderstand that sometimes, because they think about breaking parity like they're a combo player. Like I have to get this engine going so that I can now do X, Y, Z, and my opponents can't do whatever it is that I am able to do.
Right, like deafening silence. Like Cedh's play deafening silence, and it's great because it's asymmetrical. It's not affecting them at all.
Yeah, and I'm particularly not too much of a fan of that idea of asymmetricality. I like playing stacks effects that are symmetrical, actually. Because, first of all, if my opponent steals them, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
And, if my opponent copies it, it still doesn't matter, right? And oftentimes during the clone meta, that was what a lot of people were doing, was stealing and copying other stacks pieces. Yeah. And the idea is that it's not about like whether or not it's asymmetrical, because asymmetricality comes from you, the playing symmetrical pieces and then bringing that asymmetricality feel comes from you being a really good tempo player. If you can out tempo your opponent under a symmetrical effect because you understand how their strategy works and how your strategy works, and you're still able to figure out how your strategy can work even under those certain conditions. You make the moves, you make the attacks, you play the spells that will always put you further ahead along your game plan than your opponent, right? And then play the stuff that hinders your opponent's development, right? Then you don't need to worry about whether or not a card is asymmetrical. You can play the symmetrical piece. Symmetrical pieces, by the way, because of their design, they tend to be cheaper to cast than their asymmetrical counterparts.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
100%.
And so like Sphere of Resistance is way cheaper to cast than God Pharaoh's statue and whatnot.
Right.
And so
makes sense.
learning how to play under those effects and understanding that is very important. But the issue that I think, and why some people struggle with playing white a lot, is that it's not even about like knowing how to play white decks very well. It's knowing how to play every other deck and how well enough that you know how they work. You know where to hit them where it hurts. You know how exactly to slow them down.
Yeah.
And you also know, because your card evaluation, the way that most people play Commander is very egocentric, and I don't mean that in like a negative sense. It's just more the fact that people often think about it's better to advance my game plan than to slow my opponent's game plan.
100%.
But when you play like white stacks, personally for me, I have to evaluate, is it worth it to slow my opponents down over me advancing my own board state?
Yeah. But like I feel like Esper right now post meta is really good, but it's not Esper Stack Deck, it's Esper Control. They're playing the Grafdigger's Cage and the Cursed Totems and the Dranis, and it's not really slowing them down at all, but it's giving them a turn because the activated abilities are so strong. Like I put Cursed Totem in every deck I can because of Kennen, Thrasios, Cedh. Just those three I'm good, and then everything else, right? So like Tivit is a really good. Like, I'm going to play these engines, but also I'm going to play a Douthie and a Cursed Totem and a Dranith to stop you guys maybe a turn, and that's fine. So I think the issue, we'll jump right into it, like mono white. I feel like you need to give me a really good excuse not to have white in your deck. Obviously, TNT is one of the best decks right now. But I feel like mono white, other than you, no one plays mono white anymore because all the colors are really good. So I want to read off some of the mono white commanders, and then I know you said off air that you're not really playing right now. But I want to see maybe if you're cooking up anything, and maybe if you can bring mono white if you were to a tournament. So like Oswald, Al, Heliod, Lightpauls, Preston, the mono white Gandalf, Elisnorn, Tashar. Do any of those, do you think you can bring those into this post meta?
Depends on which Elesh Norn it is.
All of them.
All of them? Okay.
Well, you have the
Yeah.
mom, you have the 7 mana one, you have the actual one. I just mean in general, would you feel comfortable? Because spoiler alert, I know like a year or two ago, you were one of the top CDH guys, and everyone's like, why are you bringing mono white? Like, this deck sucks, but you play it, and you're like, yeah, I just shit on all you guys with Owl. Like, you ain't ready for this.
Yeah, honestly, it again is based on like understanding the game, how your deck works, and all that stuff. Every deck has like a specific type of movement that they perform. Like, I'll use Magda as an example because you mentioned like your friend really likes Magda.
My brother, he's in love with Magda. Magda's top 5 deck. Holy shit, that deck's good.
It's a 2 mana. I'm thinking 2 mana 2/1, not the criminal Magda, but like
Correct.
the OG,
The good one.
right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so you use it to tutor, right? So like if we break down like the actual movement of the deck, like what do? You need treasure tokens. Do you need to tap artifacts for mana? No, you don't. But like the Clock of Omens trick is an activated ability. You can literally just play like Phyrexian Revoker and name Clock of Omens if you wanted to, or Pithing Needle naming Clock of Omens.
Yeah.
And
But they can win without that. But yeah.
Yeah, they can
The
win
whole
without
deck is
it,
around
but-
Magda.
Yeah. You can pivot through Magda. You can also name Magda because it's her activated.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
as well.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. The other thing, it's an attack trigger, right? And you attack with your dwarves.
Tap. Yep.
Yep.
Whenever it
Yep.
becomes tapped.
Or yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Whenever it
you're
becomes
right.
tapped.
And
Yep.
and then you use crew ability, so you can tap all your dwarves without having to go to combat and things like that. But if you start the battlefield with like, for example, one of the things that oftentimes when people think of Magda, the first thing they think about is like Cursed Totem, right? But what they might not think about is Blind Obedience, right? Because all their stuff enters the battlefield tapped. That's a very powerful tempo card right there because they can't do it immediately. They're dwarves. They can't tap anything the turn that they come out.
Oh, get creatures in are tapped. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also the artifacts and things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't think it really matters unless it's like Kodoltha Forge Master or something like that. And so think about it from like those types of like nuances of like specifically how does this actually work. Like I need untapped permanents to tap. I need to search my library. I'm using activated abilities. You can already start thinking in your head all the different stack pieces you can play to attack these different vectors in Magda. And then what will happen is that it will force the Magda player to play and change their play patterns to a different style. Like if I play Phyrexian Invoker and I named Magda, what do you think the Magda player is going to do? They're going to try and kill Phyrexian Invoker, or they're going to just sandbag more treasures because they can still make treasures. They can still cast spells with their treasures, right? And so what do you, Stacks player, are you going to do about it? And how do you know that they're going to cast spells, right? Through it is mostly it's because they're not going to kill Revoker outright, which tells you a lot of things about your opponent. You're reading your opponents, you're understanding their behavior, but the only way that you're able to read it is because you know exactly how Magda works, right? And that's, again, the biggest difficulty is that to play white proper in terms of like stacks and all, you have to understand the DNA of your opponent's deck, and then you work from there.
Well, for me, in my experience, okay, this isn't 1v1. Like, well, you just said, okay, cool, I know how to stop the mag player, I know what to do. But now you have a blue farm, and then you have a cannon, or you have a TNT. So now you have 3 different game plans. What cards am I looking for to stop all of them? So that's why Cursed Totem can stop Kennen and Magda, then I do this, right? I think that's kind of why people go away from stacks, because there's not a lot of pieces. Like, it's not a good 1v3, or if they're playing stacks, they're playing like that Esper control stacks, or maybe a 4-color pile of I'm playing the asymmetrical stuff. So when you play mono white's really hard to 1v3, because the second you play that Revoker on the Magda, and then you play the Cursed Totem on these 2 decks, they're all be coming at you, and then you don't have interaction per se. So that's I kind of want to talk about the card quality in white.
Yeah, so I'll expand. Revoker is not a white card; it's just a generic card. So a white card that you could play would be something like Suppression Field, which taxes both Magda and Kinnan, and it also taxes the fetch lands. It also taxes the fetch lands in Blue Farm, so Blue Farm won't be able to power out.
What's it do if you activate something? It's 1 more to activate.
It's 2 more.
2 more.
Yeah.
Oh, that's huge.
It's huge.
Two
Yeah,
mana
exactly.
to activate your fetch land.
Yeah, 2 mana to activate. Yeah, if you're running like Elsha Top, for example, it costs 3 mana to activate Sensei's Top.
That's
Which,
crazy. Yeah, they're
yeah.
out of the game.
Also,
Yeah.
it taxes channel abilities. So if you're channeling Boseiju, it costs 2 more to channel.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it hits cards outside of the battlefield. Any activated ability, it taxes.
Huh.
It hits Balin because it's all Balin's activated abilities. It hits well, it doesn't hit Urza because Urza is a mana ability, but it hits something like Isochron Scepter.
Cedh?
It hits something. It hits Cedh. It hits Walking Ballista, which is the reason why a lot of like Heliod decks don't run it because it literally stops their own Walking Ballista combo. It is one of the most powerful stacks pieces, so powerful that other stacks decks can't really run it because it hurts their own stacks.
It hurts them more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, hurts them in a way because it's like most stacks decks operate on the idea that I win with a combo, and this basically hurts a lot of like stacks decks because a lot of stacks decks their combo is based off of an activated ability. And so that's why that's why most of them don't run it. I mean, you could theoretically run it in Winota, for example, but it's not a human, so you can't flip into it.
Yeah.
It's just very difficult to flip to do anything with it with Winota.
I got you.
So you can play it something like Suppression Field. So how do you deal with Blue Farm now, right? You slow down with Blue Farm a little bit, but now, like you said, they're aggroing you, right? The next thing you do, you can play Peacekeeper, right? No creature can attack anymore, right? This completely halts development. Huh?
Yeah, that's insane. I didn't even know that card did. People are not ready for that.
It's it's a 3 mana 1/1 that says creatures can't attack. Yeah, you have to pay 2 mana or you sacrifice it on your upkeep, but it's not cumulative. So you basically have the board. So what's so powerful about this card is because now let's pivot in your situation, right? Let's not think about Magda or Kinnan here, but let's look at this Blue Farm player. How does the Blue Farm player operate, right? They have 2 main sources of card draw engine in their command zone. One is Tymna, the other one is Crom, right? Post bannings, Crom is harder to cast, right? You can still cast him, that's fine. But
it's fine.
But he's slower, right? Tymna
more for the colors.
Yeah, Tymna will be your main source of card draw, but how does Tymna draw cards? Through combat, right? And so if you disrupt the flow of combat with something like Peacekeeper, you have actually not only prevented your opponent from aggroing you as a stacks player, but you've also cut off their source of card draw. Yeah. They now need to play like their One Ring or Rhystic Study to now get out from under here. The more cards your opponent plays to draw cards, the less cards that they're playing to actually win the game or interact, is the other thing.
I've noticed that too. There's less removal now. There's less interaction now because everyone's greedy with their mana bases and their cards. They'd rather play this other card engine instead of a removal spell. I played Dismember, and the guy was like, "You play Dismember?" I'm like, "Yeah, this card's fucking great." I'm not on Adnaz. I don't care about my life.
And again, that's the thing is that like your opponent's deck ends up foiling itself through that.
Yeah,
like, you have disrupted a lot of things through only 2 cards that you've played, right? And these are very like ubiquitous types of effects. They spread wide. They hit a lot of the fabric of how your opponent's deck is.
Right.
Whereas like Revoker is very precise on one thing. You are cutting a huge swath to many things because the issue with stuff like Malcolm or Tymna is that Malcolm isn't just you get a free treasure. Tymna isn't just you get a free card. Both of them operate on the idea of combat, right? Or some way to deal damage. Specifically with Malcolm, you need to deal damage with Malcolm. With Tymna, it is specifically combat. And so oftentimes when people think about like Tymna, they're thinking about like, how do I stop the card draw? They don't think about how do I stop combat, right? And you can even just stop Tymna in combat by 1 card just by leaving up a blocker to block whatever they would throw at you. And you've already denied them an extra card draw, right?
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
So there are all these other factors that, again, when you play stacks, oftentimes people think about it in terms of like it's a silver bullet and I need this specific card. It's like, no, you don't really need that specific card. You can make do with a combination of cards that you layer together to have that type of effect.
You know what card I really like? It's colorless. I really like Uba Mask.
Oh yeah, Uber
My
Mask is
brother
great.
played this card and he was like, "You don't understand how strong." Because that's everyone's game plan now. Is I'm gonna play this engine and then go from there. And it's like, okay, cool, you've exiled 4 cards, but if you can't play them this turn, you don't untap with those 4 cards.
Yeah. Do you know the
Mask is.
implication of Uber Mask, by the way?
What do you mean?
So oftentimes people think of the Draenith Magistrate lock, right? With Uber Mask.
Oh, I'm thinking of the you can't untap with all your cards because they fed you Heuristic Study.
Uh,
Yeah,
what do
Uwe
you mean?
Mask is if you were to draw a card
Yeah,
and said
yeah.
exile the top, and you can only play that till the end of turn.
Yeah.
So it's like,
But,
okay, I'll feed your Heuristic Study, but you don't untap with all those cards. Uwe Mask
yeah.
is insane.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is that most people, when they think of Uber Mask, they're only thinking of the combo with Draenith Magistrate to
Right,
lock them out.
You're right. Right.
But you're right there, and that's sort of what I was getting at with the implication of it. There's another implication of like not only do you not get your cards, there's no counter magic available.
Yeah.
Because you can't sandbag counter spells anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And so
And if you're not in blue, you're just like mono red decks or mono white decks love that card.
Well, I'm framing it this way because I think that some players don't realize that fact that your opponent can't. It's impossible for your opponent to sandbag counter spells because then they can plan out their next couple of turns.
Yeah.
To basically set up a win. And then if they need to, they'll pop Uber Mask and then try to win off of like cards or whatever. Because another thing that you can do is that you can literally count all the cards that you exile are face up. You can count how many counter spells you've exiled.
Oh, they are face up. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and again, that you're using the whole buffalo here, right? There are so much that is revealed through a single card that you don't realize. It's the same reason why people play Git Probe, right? It's not just a cantrip piece. It's information.
Free. Yeah, it's free and it's information. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's information there to take off of the Uber Mask. You get to see
100%.
what's left in their deck, and if you know what their deck's strategy is, again, the whole tempo philosophy, you realize, dude, I saw 3 free counterspells that you pitched: Fierce Guardianship, Force of Will, Mindbreak Trap. Right? Either you got the Force of Neg, or was that Force of Denial, or you got
Flare
nothing.
Denial. Yeah.
Yeah, Flare Denial. Yeah,
I got you.
So those are things, again, like using stacks pieces not just to stop your opponents, but to actually play to your advantage, like, and create this type of pseudo advantage.
Yeah. So you think white? Sorry, you think white is the best tempo color?
I think it's I would put it in the top 3. Blue and red are also, well,
I don't know.
Blue and red are pretty good.
I guess.
I mean, well, so there are a lot of old blue cards, basically, but nobody plays them. So to give you some perspective, I bring up about like Kamigawa because there was something special that happened to white in Kamigawa. They actually color shifted a bunch of blue cards into white in Kamigawa. So you know Hokori Dust Drinker?
Mm-mm.
So it's a 4-mana 2/2. It's a legendary creature, and it basically says lands don't untap. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, they untap 1 land. So
it's kind of like a stasis effect.
It's kind of like a Winter Orb.
Winter Orb
really.
effect. Yeah.
But Winter Orb, you untap 1 land during your untap step. This actually shuts down Winter Orb, by the way, because you can't untap anything during your untap step.
Ooh.
Or you can't untap any lands during your untap step with Hokori Dust Drinker, right? And if you play something like Eon Hub is an artifact that says players skip their upkeep, then basically nobody untaps their lands ever.
Ugh, that's just a lock. Gross.
Yeah, and it's also a trigger that you can stifle. So if you want to like screw over one player in particular, you can just stifle their the Hokori trigger on their upkeep, so they don't get to untap their land. But this was actually a blue card back in the day. It was called Rising Waters. And it was a blue enchantment. Another example that I think is more iconic for people is Ghostly Prison. And that was not...
Propaganda?
Yeah,
yep.
Propaganda.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think. There was also like another white card that was oh yeah, Kataki War's Wage.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I
So
had
there's
it. It was there.
yeah, yeah. Do you know what the blue card for that was?
Uh, uh something war.
No, it's Energy Flux.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
way
yeah,
off. I was
yeah,
thinking something different.
yeah. It's a 3 mana enchantment, and players have to pay 2 mana to keep their artifacts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's even worse than Kataki.
I was gonna say it sounds like a
Yeah.
tabernacle. Ugh.
Yeah. There's another really powerful blue card that almost never gets played, and it's called Equilibrium. It's a 4 mana enchantment that says if a land would enter, and it's a replacement effect, so it's not even a trigger, right? If a land would enter the battlefield under an opponent's control, and they have and they would have more lands than you, they have to sacrifice one of their lands. Yeah. So it's a great way of you to like hose down or lock down like Timna Thrasios decks, for
That's
example.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, are you brewing anything? Little birdie told me you might be brewing something.
Yeah, I'm brewing Mono White Micaeus, actually.
Okay. What's he do
so
again?
he's X and a white for a 0/0, and he enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. And then he has the activate ability, tap him to put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control.
So
He's also a human cleric.
in CEDH.
Yeah.
Okay, so some counter synergies.
Yeah, +1/+1 counter synergies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that combo with Ballista?
It doesn't combo with Ballista.
Oh, okay.
I don't really play combo decks is the other thing.
I was gonna say it kind of sounds. So, what's kind of the whole idea of the deck?
So, we'll talk about like your favorite white card, Esper Sentinel, right?
Woo.
Yeah, he makes Esper Sentinel bigger.
Ooh, I love that. We're gonna talk about him later.
Yeah. But there are his creature type is actually very relevant. He's a human cleric, and there's actually a white equipment that was printed last year, I think, from like March of Machines, and it's called Conjurer's Mantle. It's 2 mana, and it's 1 and a white, and it has Equip 1. It gives the equipped creature +1/+1 and Vigilance. So this is really relevant for Micaeus because you can play him at 2 mana with only a single +1/+1 counter. You can equip the equipment onto him, and then you can use his ability immediately to put it, a +1/+1 counter on all your creatures without him dying because he still has base power 1/1 now from the equipment, right? The equipment also gives him Vigilance, which allows you to attack with him and block with him, and also hold up his tap ability at instant speed. And so he can be both offensive and defensive. So he can do all your attack triggers as well for any card that cares about your attack triggers, like Adeline, for example.
Yeah.
Like you attack with him, you put 3 1/1s on the battlefield, and immediately they become 2/2s with his ability. Yeah. But the equipment has one other very important ability. It's when the equipped creature attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your deck and put a creature. You reveal a creature that shares a type with this card, right? And put it into your hand.
A cleric or a human.
Yeah. A cleric or human. Esper Sentinel is a human, right?
Yep.
Right. Either Sworn Canonist is a cleric. Ranger Captain Eos is a human. Adeline is a human.
Drannith,
right?
Human.
Drannith is a human, right? Sanctum Prelate is a human cleric.
Oh my
right?
God.
Leanin Arbiter is a cleric, right?
Wow.
So yeah, like this is basically mono white humans, but it's also mono white humans and clerics.
That sounds so much fun. What about that white card, the Lion Sash? It's an equipment.
Yep.
And then you could, I think, add a counter to it or something.
Yeah. And then there are now creatures from Foundations that have like the reason why I'm building is literally because of Foundations. There's like a creature that says whenever this creature gets a +1/+1 counter, draw a card. Right.
Oh.
This ability triggers once a turn. There's also another one from like way back when, I think from like Ixalan. It's a 2 mana 2/2 that says when this creature gets a +1/+1 counter, draw a card. Right. So you have like tons of card draw. You have card velocity, but you still play like the Hate Bear tempo pieces that you're playing, and you're very low to the ground. Right.
I
And
love
your creatures
that.
get stupid huge. You can still run. So even though you don't combo with your commander, you can still play Walking Ballista. And what's so crazy about it is, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, Micaeus also has another activated ability. Tap, put a +1/+1 counter on him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Sorry. He also loads his own counters, right?
All right.
So,
Because I know the black Micaeus. I wasn't familiar
yeah.
with the white one.
Yeah, and so the thing is, like, with a walking ballista, you can actually just load counters on walking ballista, and even if you're not comboing with it, it's now like an orcish bow, like a mini orcish bow.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
Shoot other creatures and kill their mana dorks like Bloom Tender or whatever with.
Mm-hmm.
But you can run Heliod in the deck if you want. There are other effects like there's a human from Modern Horizons that says modified creatures you control have lifelink. Putting counters on creatures makes them modified.
Yeah, counters and yep.
So you can dig and build your own Heliod combo if you need to.
So I want to talk about mono white. I think personally it's probably one of the best mono colors around. Just because people aren't playing it doesn't mean it's not good. So with mono white in particular, because it's a white episode, what's kind of the win cons? Because I feel like all that stuff sounds good. It's low to the ground. You obviously have Heliod Ballista, yada yada yada. What's kind of the win cons in white?
So I could go over like each of the commanders that you listed. Like Heliod, for example, is the Walking Ballista combo. Teshar, you usually just loop for infinite mana and then using like KCI combos.
Yeah.
And then you can kill them with Walking Ballista. A lot of it tends to just be through Walking Ballista. And Walking Ballista is just generally a very good card because at the least it's 2 mana, deal 1 damage to a creature.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's a removal spell or a combo piece. Yeah.
And what's so nice about white is that it's so resilient because it has so many ways to reanimate a Walking Ballista, and it has ways to tutor for it as well, that it's one of the most common win cons for white.
Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah. I thought it was just Heliod Ballista. So, say the deck that you're building, right? Like the new deck, which sounds awesome. Send me the list. It sounds really great.
Oh yeah, he also grabs Recruiter the Guard. So Recruiter Guard finds anything else.
Yeah.
Right.
So why would somebody though, like, just say Heliod, the mono white Heliod that comes with Ballista, right? That deck's really good. It's just hasn't really, because the stacks, what people play it wrong, whatever. But why would someone play the deck that you're gonna build over like a Heliod deck or an Oswald deck or a Teshar deck, right? Like what would appeal that to somebody, or is this just your own brew that nobody should touch because they don't know how to play it?
Nobody should touch because they don't know how to play it, essentially. And, I mean, honestly, it's easier to win with the other decks than it is with this one because the way that I play tends to go through combat. I follow very hard and true to the tempo philosophy. Back to the original philosophy of Fire. Your life total is at 40. I'm counting to 0, right?
Even the CDH, because it's 120. It's not just 40.
It's not even 120 because your opponent is doing things like fetches, like Dismember, like you mentioned. You just paid like 10% of your life total.
Okay,
to cast Dismember.
So it's really like 100. Yeah.
Even so to put this into perspective, because I don't think people. Yeah, Timnaz does 2 damage every turn.
Ad Nauseous.
Right? Ad Nauseous.
One rings.
Right? Yeah, 1 rings, and so there are an incremental advantage, which is another like philosophy about advantage. Mm-hmm. So, for example. People have done like the rough estimate of like how many cards you draw from Rhystic Study, right? How many cards do you draw from Esper Sentinel? Mm-hmm. How many treasures you create from Smothering Tithe, right? It's really incremental advantage is very, very difficult because there are tons of cards since Wizards has decided to create products specifically for Commander. They have printed tons of cards that focus on incremental advantage. Aristocrats, which is like a 60-card archetype, is really good at demonstrating what incremental advantage looks like. Because oftentimes players have this, beginner players, casual players who go into CDH also have this problem. Even like seasoned CDH players have this problem of not understanding or not being able to evaluate incremental advantage very well. Because oftentimes it's like, I paid 3 mana for a card that lets me draw 1 card, right? That sounds like a bad deal. Right, but if I get to draw a card again with this card, right, it's already as good as Divination.
Yeah.
If I draw a card again, it's at the same level as Thirst for Knowledge, but I don't have to discard anything. Right. If I've drawn 4 cards with this card at this point, I have made a very good deal on this card. Mm-hmm. If I've drawn 5 cards with this card, right, I am like at this territory here where it's almost like as if I played Wheel of Fortune, but nobody drew any cards except for me, right? And
Yeah.
that's the whole thing about like incremental advantage. Lotho is a really good example of this
Oh,
as
the
well.
card's so good.
Yeah. It's good because people can visually see how many treasures you've accumulated, how much mana you're able to generate.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're but the subtle things as to how much damage you take over time. I'll put this in another perspective, right? Let's say I'm playing against Rogside, which doesn't really have that many creatures aside from Silas Red, who's a really good blocker, honestly, and sometimes a really good way to recur some of your artifacts. But if they're not blocking anything, and I play like a 2/2 hate bear, right? And then next turn I play like another like 2 power hate bear, like Archon of Emeria or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
they're out of the game.
Yeah, well, like, let's not even think about like them. Yeah, they can't do anything. But let's focus about like how much damage I've presented on the table. I'm doing 4 damage a turn. Last turn I dealt 2 damage attacking with my 2/2 Lean and Arbiter because now they can't tutor their library. Right. Next turn I play Archon of Maria. They can only cast 1 spell a turn. They're taking 4 damage. Right, on top of the previous 2. They've taken a total of 6 damage. Right, I'm assuming that like their turn 1 play, they had to have played like a fetch land or something. Right, and so they've lost a total of 7 life. Right, next turn, let's say I play like Spirit of the Labyrinth. Right, and I swing again.
Oof.
Right, and so now I'm hitting them for 7 damage a turn. Right. But it's additive, right? Because oftentimes people only look at how much damage you have on board. They don't realize how much damage you've been doing them over the course of several turns.
Yeah, they look down and they're at 20 life. And they're like, how am I at 20 life? And then now you're sitting with 4 or 5 creatures and you have 10, 15 power and you're like, hey.
Yeah. The key to like a win conless, that was the term, a win conless white deck is that you're actually winning every single time you're attacking.
Yeah.
You're
just winning in time was the hard part.
Yeah, you're developing your board, but your development is also your opponent's undevelopment of their life total. You have to keep that in mind. Is that like even doing damage to your opponent is tempo. It's a development to your game plan, which is killing your opponent, right? It's less about what you have on your board and what your opponent is left with. And that's an important thing about like the win cons in white. Walking Ballista, I can talk about Walking Ballista for anyone else who doesn't want to do that because again, that's really complicated and really hard to like actually math out and think strategically. Walking Ballista though, there's tons of play patterns with it. You can Lighten Tutor for it, right? You can play Recruiter the Guard because it's a 0/0, so it has 0 toughness, and you can just tutor for it with Recruiter
Ranger
the Guard.
Captain?
Ranger Captain finds it as well. The other Ranger of Aos finds it.
Yeah.
He also finds a Mom to protect it and all that stuff.
Mom!
Right?
What are you talking about, Mom? Yeah.
Yeah, it also finds Esper Sentinel. Like, any of the Rangers are really good with that. Like, in the Heliod decks, there's an Assembly Worker that can tutor for a Construct, and you can find it with that. There's just basically like a bajillion ways you can find a Walking Ballista and win the game with Walking Ballista.
Okay.
And then you just do the thing with Walking Ballista.
I like that you came back to that. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah.
So we're already at an hour. 2 more things I want to talk about, and then I have a mini top 10. So one thing I want to talk about, you said you've been playing 2004, and you've been playing the Flash Hulk era and all that stuff. I want to talk about white card draw. Holy shit. I think it's the second best color now. It went from has no card draw at all. And I want to talk about kind of white and CDH over the last 5 years and how much it's grown. I was playing a deck, I think it was in Sultai. And I was like, besides my blue cards, I don't have any card draw. I miss my Ogma. I miss my Esper. I miss my Trouble in Pairs. So let's kind of talk about, the kind of roller coaster, but now it's card draw is really good in white.
Well, card draw is really good in white, and this kind of segues from what I talked about with incremental advantage. A lot of it is incremental card draw.
Correct. That's right.
Yeah.
It
doesn't draw
one.
It doesn't draw.
Yep.
Yep. It doesn't draw a card all at once. It draws it over time, and it's really hard for your opponents to evaluate. Esper Sentinel has now become like this type of boogeyman, because
so
like people.
Good.
Yeah, but there are other things that you could be doing, like Smuggler Share, for example. Can draw you cards, especially in like a one ring type of meta where people are drawing batches of cards, right? Another good one is Alms Collector, which actually hits the one ring really hard.
Yep.
Yeah,
But
and
people don't
again,
even
like,
look at those like a Timna or an Esper. They just, oh, that's just Alms Collector, and you're like, thanks for this 6 cards this game.
yeah, I mean, well, you can even do it against Tinda. Like,
Yeah,
in response to their trigger, flash it in, and they can only pay 1 life because if they pay any more, you get to draw cards,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of these types of effects in white that like Trouble in Pairs is probably another really really good one.
God, that card is a
I mean,
house, dude.
yeah, even when you look at something like Mangara, I think Mangara ought to be revisited because of Trouble in Pairs because it has created this type of play pattern for players. I see that players are like you said, players are more greedy now.
Yeah, 100%.
And so Mangara used
What
to
is it?
not be great. Mangara, the Diplomat.
I
It's a 4 mana 2/4 lifelinker in white. It's 3 in a white, so it's easily splashable. It's not double pip like Grand Abolish or Trouble in Pairs. So you can definitely run it in like any multicolor deck, right? It does run higher on the mana cost, so it's better in like a more mid-ranging deck like Timna Thrasios.
Yeah.
Right? But it's basically whenever your opponent casts a second spell, draw a card.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
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 And if your opponent attacks you or a planeswalker you control with 2 or more creatures, draw a card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going
So-
against a Rog Timna, and they triggered my Trouble in Pairs all 3 times on their turn.
Exactly. Right?
Thanks.
So, and the thing is, like, Cedh decks can literally just tutor for this guy because he's legendary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's a lot of different types of incremental card draw that you can run in white. I think it has
Yeah.
changed the way that people look at and play with white because, again, like I mentioned before, back in the day, it didn't have this type of like card advantage or card velocity,
Right.
And you had to play on a tempo scale. The incremental advantage is still a type of tempo play that you're doing, though, because you're not seeing your cards all at once, so you can't actually make your decisions with the full breadth of what the next set of cards are going to be.
Yeah, you're kind of going with the flow. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and so you're still thinking like a tempo player.
Yeah.
The thing that, so I will say that like in mono white decks, this is less effective, right? The card advantage of mono white is really powerful, but the issue is that white doesn't have the ramp to facilitate that, unless if you're like playing like Serra Sanctum and Nykthos, right? And with Serra Sanctum, you have to be like more of an enchantress type of deck in white.
The Sithis. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm talking about specifically mono white, so that's even harder because
Right.
this.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so and with the effects of like rule of law and stuff like that, the card advantage is not very helpful. You get to see more of your cards, but you can only play one of them a turn.
Right.
Yeah. And so this kind of sheds a light on Kinnan, because this also sheds a light on Al and how I built Al as well. Because Al was not focused on card advantage. Oftentimes, whenever I played Al, I would have an empty hand. And the idea is that, I can play off the top 7 cards of my library at any given time.
Yeah.
And I can do it repeatedly over and over and over. And
that card is so good.
yeah, I mean, well, like, it focuses, it gets, like, I really hope that with some of the new cards that they designed for Commander, like, even Nadu was a great example of this, that how irrelevant card draw is to the bigger scheme of how we play Magic. Because there are so many ways, because the problem with card advantage is that you still have to play your cards. And the reason why like Dockside was so good was because you drew a bunch of cards and you had the mana to play them. And the reason why people, I think, from my impression of the meta, people go back to like Timna Thrasios is because they have the green to play the cards that they draw.
Yeah.
But what if you didn't need to pay to play them and you just put them on the battlefield?
Yeah.
Just skip the card draw, skip the playing, and just put them on the battlefield. That's why Kinnan is so good.
Yeah.
That's why Al is so problematic as well.
Activated abilities, I think, are going to be what 2025 is all about. Kinnan,
Yeah, and then this-
Sisay, Magda,
Balin,
all the stuff. I don't need to cast spells to win, guys. I already casted my couple spells, and I'm just winning here. And it's like, I had 3 counter spells in my hand and a Rhystic Study. Good for you. I win.
I mean, well, like Magda's a great example of this, and so is Sisay, because think about card velocity. The player who sees the most of their deck is winning the game, right? Because they have access to most of it. Tutors have the highest card velocity because you see everything in your deck.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And so it's like, I don't need cards in my hand. I have what I need exactly at any given time.
Is that why they're good? Because it's kind of a clock, right?
Yeah.
Like, Magda and Sisay kind of, we don't have best card quality, but we take that up in synergy. Yeah, we're playing 7 dwarfs, but if I have artifact dwarf and 5 treasures, I win the game.
Yes, it's the idea that like I don't have good cards in my hand, but it doesn't matter because I have good cards in my deck.
I have it too.
And I have access to and I have access to my deck, right? Cedh the same. Well, Cedh probably has better card quality, but the idea still with Cedh is that like I don't have to worry about like necessarily my mulligans in a way. I don't have to worry about necessarily what I start with because I know how I'm going to end it with. Other decks cannot say the same. Right. It's usually I know what I'm starting with,
right, and
I need to figure out how I'm going to end it later after my Rhystic study resolves, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Cedh has a very good through line where once I have Cedh online, I know exactly what I'm looking for. And all that stuff.
Well, and you're probably winning the game. Yeah, it's a new.
And that's tempo plus velocity in one combo without the card advantage.
Yeah. But you give up the card advantage because you have that nuke. Exactly. Hey, if I activate Cedh here, it's over. If the requirements.
Yeah. Card advantage is really powerful. Don't get me wrong.
100%.
Like if I were to if I were to build other decks, right, I would care a lot more about card advantage. Yeah. But that's the thing that like I think players need to understand because I feel like the reason why Kinnan and Cedh are so powerful is because players still forget about that. Right?
Yeah.
They're like, how is this deck able to win even though it's not drawing so many cards?
Well, I think Thrasios is the best it's ever been right now.
Yeah.
I'll just sit behind this Thrasios in a training grounds and just I'll
draw
get
cards.
lands and I'll draw cards and I'll just sit back and then how do you win the game? Like what? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's just through pure card advantage, but you can interact with the training grounds. I also think people need to interact with enchantments more, which is a really hard ask because the only two colors that can do it are literally the two colors that play it.
Yeah. Yeah, the next color we're going to talk about is blue in a couple weeks, and I do want to add a little something. I think Azorius got really, really good. And there's a couple new Azorius guys. Shorekai is doing really good right now. There's a new guy, something Beach. It's ETB. You draw a card for each creature that has toughness bigger than power, and Comedian just top 16 to tournament with it.
Yeah,
and people are like, "What? Oh my God, Azorius!" And I'm like, "Yeah, white and blue are really good together." No one's
really
noticed.
funny because before he went to the tournament, we were actually talking about that deck. So
it's insane.
Behind the scenes, I was talking to him about it because I mean he had the idea already, but I was seeing it the same way too because a lot of people saw that guy as like, oh, that's just Arcades. It's like, no,
right.
Arcades has the incremental advantage of you drawing for each wall that you play. This can draw you cards off of every blink spell that you're casting.
Yeah. Displacer Kitten is broken in that deck, and it's
and then Draenith Magistrate has more toughness than its power, so it will trigger off of Draenith Magistrate. Well,
that's when I look at
it triggers on itself.
Yep. Yeah. How many cards can you play that is that? You play all of the bad 0 mana guys, right? So it's like Ornithopter and all that stuff. You could just draw off of it right away.
But you don't even really need to do that, in my opinion, because there's already like a lot of really good ones. Like, you could do stuff like Archon of Emeria, Eidolon of Rhetoric. You could do stuff like Draenith Magistrate. There are like tons of like white and blue cards. Like you can even do it off of Thassa's Oracle, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
And
I'll just have this Oracle sitting around, and then when I want to win, I'll just flicker it.
I'll just flicker it, exactly, right?
Yeah.
And your opponents can't do anything about it, right?
Yeah.
And it's so funny because you can even run like slow blinkers. I will touch the Spirit Realm and exile my Rule of Law. Now I'm going to play all the cards that I draw, and then we'll come back, right?
I feel like you do really good with that deck.
Yeah. I mean, like, I was actually building that deck, and then Ian's like, I'm building this deck. I was like, all right, I'm not going to build it.
Damn it.
I mean, I have another Azorius deck that I'm also, that I used to play that I'm thinking about bringing back in the current meta, which is Dragon Lord Ojutai.
Yep. That guy's really good.
Yeah. He's really good. He has hexproof as long as he's untapped. And then you give him vigilance, and he becomes a powerhouse.
I'm very familiar with that guy. That guy's really good. He's in my Air Dragon deck, and it's like...
Yeah, there's a card called Tarian Soul Cleaver. It's an equipment. It costs 1 mana, right? So you can tutor for it with Urza Saga, right? Or Trinket Mage, or Stoneforge, or whatever, or Inline Tutor, or whatever.
Anything, yeah.
It gives the equipped creature vigilance, right? But it also has it puts a +1/+1 counter on the equipped creature whenever an artifact or creature goes to the graveyard. So treasures, for example, will trigger this.
Wow.
Right? And then you play Cataclysm. Yeah, you,
Gross. I
yeah.
scoop. I'm out.
I was playing it in the dockside meta because it was really good against dockside.
Mm,
Because oftentimes the issue with dockside was the dockside meta was also the clone meta because everybody wanted to copy dockside.
right.
Is the thing, and so the idea from a stacks player's perspective is like I can't just tell my opponents not to overextend. It's like telling someone not to pay for risk extend. They're going to pay for it anyway. And so the answer, this is the other problem I have with stacks players is that I just feel like you can't just tell your opponent to stop doing something, right? If politicking doesn't work, play cards to disincentivize them from wanting to do it in the first place.
Right. I love
Right.
Ristic Studies in Mystic Gamora when they're Thalia effects.
Yes.
Or, okay, you're not going to play your spell because I have a Ristic Study out? Perfect. Or I have a Mystic Gamora out? Awesome.
Yeah. And Thalia is the worst because of that, because she doesn't help stacks players convince other players not to pay. Because at that point, they can't afford to just not play Magic. They will just not pay then because of your Thalia.
Right. So they'll play the Thalia effect because they're going to play their spell, but they're going to let the guy with the Ristic Study draw all the cards in the world. Yeah. And you're like, okay, I guess I'm helping this guy. And I think that's the problem with stacks.
Yeah, the discretion, the thing with stacks is discretion. Sometimes the best stacks effect is not the one that you're playing, right? Is when you show restraint about playing it so that your opponent, it's kind of like what you said. It's like, I'm not going to play this Curse Totem immediately, right? I want my opponent to play all their activated ability creatures, their mana dorks and stuff, and so that when I play this, I've basically time walked them. Yeah, that's a 60 card Magic term. It comes back in the day when people like, you know, played their Serra Angel for 5 mana, right? They tap out, play Serra Angel, and then you paid 1 mana to cast like Unsummon and bounce it back to their hand. It's like, great, and now I'm going to cast Factor Fiction with the remaining 4 mana that I have, right?
I just got time locked. Yeah. So now I'm sitting with this Serra Angel in my hand, and then you just 100%.
Yeah, and I'm being the blue player here. And you can do that in white. You can do that in red. You can do that in any color as long as you understand how tempo works. How much mana did my opponent spend to do this? What did my opponent do on my turn? How do I just undo that for them? Right? Yeah. How do I just play a card that just makes it so that, great, your turn meant nothing?
Well, that's why like Bowmasters is really good against the green decks. It's like, oh, okay, you just did all your green stuff. Oh, that's cool. I'm going to instep, poke that. And now the Kindred player's like, oh, I don't have any dorks left. And it's like, Bowmasters is broken. I know.
And what makes white better in CDH than blue in this situation? Because blue's really good in 60-card Magic as a tempo color. Mm-hmm. But what makes white better is the fact that white has staying power. Once you play that effect, right? Like, for example, your opponent taps out to play, like, some big ETB effect. I can't think of one right now.
Okay.
But like Kogla, let's say Kogla, and they're like a Savala deck or something like that, right? And you just respond like, cool, flash in Hushwing Griff or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
ETBs are gone. Yep.
Yeah, you're in response, your ETBs are gone. Or
for 2 mana. Yeah.
For 2 mana, right? Even better is like if like your opponent, you know, cast like a really big spell for their turn, or they cast Underworld Breach, right? Preparing for a really big breach turn, then you Born Upon the Wind, right? You don't have a counter spell, but you flash an Archon of Emeria, right?
Oof.
And once the Archon resolves, they can't interact with it because they played their 1 spell this turn.
Yeah. Counter this now, or you're out of the, and they've already cast the breach, and they've already, you know, the worst thing with the breach, I love breach, but I'd rather you just counter the breach and I pass turn instead of breach resolves and then Visages you the breach. And now I don't have a hand, I don't have any mana, the breach is sacrifice, I'm totally wiped out. And so you don't need to counter it, hit it with the Visages you, and it's
exactly. And that's the tempo play. People already do it, but they don't think about it purely from a tempo sense. They think of it more as like, this is a really good play, but they don't think about like how many other plays they can do that's exactly like it. Yeah. And then when you're playing like white the way that I play it, you're always thinking about that. Every game match that you take is always based on that philosophy of like, everything that I'm doing is a 2-for-1.
You're doing it for a reason. Yeah. That's a good point that you said. You know, the card I like, it's a 3-for-1, is the new Aven Interrupter card.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, you have Breach on the stack. I'm going to flash this in. Now your stuff for Breach is gone, and then now that guy can't cast his commander, and then now I have a 1-3 for my Timna Malcolm. And then, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, whoa, what kind of card? I love cards like that, especially.
And then you play Draenith Magistrate, and on your turn, it's
Yeah.
like, here's an Aven Interrupter, right? Plot that card. Untap for my turn. Here's a Draenith Magistrate. Have fun.
Yeah,
right?
everyone's like, all right, guys, so you guys gonna scoop to this or what?
Yeah, I mean, like, you can untap Draenith Magistrate into Deafening Silence.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you kill Draenith Magistrate, you can't cast the Underworld Breach that turn.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or, okay, cool, like, you kill the Dranith on end step, and then you cast your commander on your main phase, and then nothing else. It's like, okay, then the next turn, so you time walked him. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm with you. So I want to get into, it's been about an hour 15. Two more big things I want to talk about is I have a top 10. Just, I think if someone, we talked about this off air, if somebody were to go, these are the best 20, 30 CDH cards, I feel like there's 5, 6, or 7 of the first 15 cards that are white, right? We'll get to that in a minute, but the big thing I want to talk about, and I think why white is one of the best colors, and the best support color is the silence effects, right? I want to talk about, okay, so, for example, Timna Thrasios. Everyone's playing Timna Thrasios right now. It's really strong with all the stuff that you've said, right? I'm a big Tevish guy, hence the podcast name. So I'm playing Tevish Thrasios. So I'm kind of looking at Timna Thrasios, and I'm like, well, I like Tevish more. But all I'm doing, it's the same deck, but all I'm doing is giving up the white cards for maybe a Necropotence or some Dark Ritual stuff, or a little bit of more black, more like splash Tevish stuff, right? And I'm just like, Tevish Thrasios is good, but it doesn't hold a candle to that because of the white cards. Esper Sentinel, the Silence, Grand Abolisher, the Cutzel, right? So I want to talk to the mono white guy about the silence effects and why are they so fucking powerful? They're so good.
So this goes more into like how Commander functions. It's the idea that it's really complicated. I'll go on a slight tangent here. Give me like 30 seconds on this.
You got
if I play Counterbalance, right?
Yeah.
In 1v1, just in 1v1, right? I have a Counterbalance. Your opponent doesn't know what's the top card of the deck, right? They play a card. I reveal the top. And say it's the card that matches the mana value, it counters it. Great. And say it's 2. My opponent now knows that they can't play a 2-drop this turn. So they'll play something else, right? They'll play another card, and then I show them a counterspell from my hand to counter that card, right? And then my opponent's like, great, can't do anything here. I already burned 2 cards. I'm going to pass the turn, right? I untap for my turn, and I draw a card. You now don't know what the top card of the deck is anymore, right? And what's more important is that I have untapped. The issue with Counterbalance in a multiplayer game is that if I do that to the first player, I don't untap after their turn ends.
Right.
It goes to the next player. And I'm now mana short from playing counterspells. I need to have free counterspells in my hand.
Yeah.
Otherwise, where am I going to get all this mana from, right? The issue with cards like Gaia's Cradle and things like that is that you can't bank that mana across multiple turns, right? This is the issue with like things like counterspells. It's really hard to defend with counterspells because they're so expensive in terms of mana. When you're for each one that you're playing, the whole like part of the philosophy about like how Rogsai was built was the idea that everything had to be very lightweight. One of the adages they had is if it's over 3 mana, it's a bad magic card, right? Because it was on that philosophy that because you're not running white, all your interactions to defend your combo has to be incredibly cheap,
Right.
Otherwise, you can't fight off 3 players at once.
Defense grid.
Defense grid is a great example of this. Of why do you run defense grid, right? For that reason, the moment that you play defense grid, it's a declaration of you're winning the game.
Right.
Right.
Well, there's a Rhystic study, and you're feeding the Rhystic study, and you have to get this defense grid down, or you're losing.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so the idea of like silence, it's the same type of philosophy. It's this idea of like I am presenting this to you to see who wants to stop me, because if this resolves, right, then I win. And what's so great about it is that I'm not showing you the combo that I'm playing to win the game.
Yeah.
So if this does get stopped, great. I burned your interaction.
Oh, that's
right?
the worst.
Yeah.
It's like we fight over this silence, and he goes, okay, cool. Awesome. Passes Oracle. And we're like, burn 4 counterspells.
Yeah. Or even better, it's like you can show it. You can see how much your opponent puts their cards on the. It's like a game of poker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're raising the blind here, and you're like, all right, cool. I'm going to check this. I'm going to check this again, right? And maybe you have more interaction in your hand, but then you've seen that your opponent can potentially play more, and you're like, no, I'm fresh out of counterspells, and that's a straight up lie, right? You actually do have interaction, but you're not going to go for it, right? And you're just going to let it happen, right? And then next time you play Ranger Captain of Eos, and then you pop that instead, right?
Oh, that card's so good.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk about that card in a minute.
Yeah, the play pattern with Silence, Ranger, and all this stuff is that you don't have to commit to winning the game. You can just show it, and if they don't interact, then it's safe to commit.
Especially
right?
the creature ones, right?
Hmm?
Like if I cast a Grand Abolisher, there's 4 or 5 counter spells for Grand Abolisher.
Yeah.
Right?
The creature ones are really hard to deal with because the way that counter spells are designed, it can be countered, but all the ones that can counter it and can also counter other spells tend to be like 3 mana or more. And the only ones that you...
Force of Wills, Mana Drains.
Yeah, Force of Wills. Yeah, the free ones cost you card advantage as well. And Force of Wills and Mana Drains cost 2 blue pips, which usually means that you can't you can't do Mana Drain plus Counterspell, for example.
Right.
Because then you suddenly need to have access to 4 blue mana.
4 blue mana. Yeah, that's crazy in this economy. Yeah.
Grocery prices are an all-time high, and so is blue mana.
2 blue is crazy. 4 blue? No way.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and double white is easier in this situation because, again, white has staying power. You can play it, and you don't need to win this turn. You can just pass the turn, right? You literally can play this game of
right.
footsies.
It's not like it's a fairy or a defense grid. You can easily cast an early Grand Abolisher and people forget about it.
Exactly. You put it down. Ranger Captain of Eos is the same way. People forget about it.
It's defensive and offensive.
Yep.
Hey, man, I'm going to crack this on your upkeep.
Yeah, you can play it, and it sits there, and you can untap with extra mana now, right? It's like a counterspell that you get to plot, and you're like, I don't have to pay for this later, right? It's
exactly. Yeah. Oh, it's so strong. Yeah. And I love the famous Cavern Souls on human, Grand Abolisher, win the game, and they're like, yeah, you got it.
From my perspective, this is also like a tempo play because you're basically not spending mana for this type of interaction. And then when you untap with it, you already have it readied and available for you.
Yeah.
And so Grand Abolisher and Ranger Captain are a great example of this because you can put it down and you can invest in a later turn. You develop your board state. You have 5... Between those two, you have 5 power on the battlefield that you can swing at to someone who can't block it. And they can't because Grand Abolisher is stopping them from flashing in anything against you, right? And so you can go in without any surprises if they don't have a really good defense. If you're doing like a Timna deck, for example, that's 7 power on the table that you can be turning sideways with.
Yeah.
I think that some players need to be more brazen about how they use Grand Abolisher because I see some players just sit back with it like it's an enchantment. And it's like, no, that's a creature. That's 2 damage on the table you can get. That's an extra Timna draw you can be getting.
Right. It's not a good blocker, but it's a really good attacker.
It's a really good attacker. Yeah. And if you can get it in, great. My other thing is like, this is how I also played a Timna Thrasios deck. There's actually a Playing with Power video where I'm playing Timna Thrasios, by the way.
I know. I've done my research. Yeah, and you hosed everybody. You cast Emrakul, I think.
Yeah, I cast Emrakul.
And you fucking shit on they're like, what? Emrakul? Yeah. And you I remember that video.
The key, by the way, to stopping me was killing my Mana Dork on turn 1. And I have explained in the comments about that. But again, that's a tempo play. And it was really obvious to kill the Mana Dork because I went turn 1 Otawara. Like, nobody plays Otawara turn 1 to play a Mystic Remora.
Right. But no one... That's just experience. No one looks at that. No one goes, oh, whatever, he played as Otawara, da-da-da-da-da. No,
I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Like, you have to read the whole thing. And I think, like, players don't... Going back to what I say, everything that you do is for a reason. You should honestly be playing very mindfully about all your game actions in that type of way.
Yeah, I love when people try, like at the Boil, I had a Grand Abolisher on the stack, and someone... Well, no, not that time. I had a Ranger Captain out. And he was like, well, why would I was like, hey, I have a Mystical Tutor. I'll get a counter spell. This guy has a Glinthorn on the stack. He's Malcolm Vile. I had a Ranger Captain. And I'm like, if I crack this, on his turn, we can interact, right? So he's like, yeah, but why would I give you a spell to you to stop him? Because I don't care if I lose to him or to you. Because I have a Ranger Captain out. I can't. What's my politic? Sorry, I have a Ranger Captain. Like, I'll crack it now, I guess. But no, he's right. I was going to untap with a Ranger Captain and win the game. So I had no, like, leeway with the politics because the Ranger Captain's so strong.
Yeah. I have Tyler from Play to Win and I have some thoughts about, like, how people politic. I'm not a fan of politicking with words. I'm more of a fan of politicking with cards.
With spells. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm the same.
Like,
I'm the same.
Yeah. Like, I play a card. I expect you to react to it. Kill it. Counter it. Anything that you do to my card tells me what you want the game to go.
Right.
And it tells me how I'm supposed to play back.
Yeah.
Right?
Or like turn 0. I couldn't tell you how many times I see a Magna player, right? And I'm like, oh, Magna, that's really cool. How long have you been on Magna? He could either be like, just sleeved up Magna. Okay, don't have to worry about you. Or I've been playing Magna since day 1. Okay, now I have to worry about you. And that's just a conversation before we even look at our hands. And now I know it's a mulligan because I know what type of player you are. And that's my politics. Or like, I have a Grand Abolisher on the stack, and people are like, oh, I want to draw here, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, show me 3 counter spells for Grand Abolisher, and I'll think about a draw. You're not just going to let me, you know what I'm saying? You're not just going to talk your way out of me winning. Like, I need, because I agree, I don't want you guys to counter my stuff, and that guy just untaps and wins. But that's just tournament talk. I just mean in general. I'm with you. Show me the cards. Let's play this out. I'm here to win or lose. I'm not here to draw. And that's what I did at the Boyle. I drew 3 times. I went 0-3 and 0. And I'm just like, guys, like, fuck, let me win. Fuck. Shit.
Yeah. I mean, well, everyone wants to win, but I just think that, like, I'm less keen on the idea of, like, winning with words and more with, like, playing, being very strategic. And that goes into, like, a whole game theory about Commander that I'm more than happy to talk about in another episode.
Yeah, it's been an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But it's all good.
I
appreciate
it's not even
your time.
related to white.
Yeah,
it's not even related to white. So, but yeah, politicking in Commander is really weird. And for your 60-card competitive friends, honestly, I think that's where I would advertise that in, because I think there are very interesting competitive play patterns that do not require words. Like, I can give an example with, like, heuristic study in a game theory perspective. And I've talked to other economists about this as an example, which I think is really interesting because a lot of people compare it to the prisoner's dilemma, but it's actually not the prisoner's dilemma. It's slightly different, and I don't think other people realize that. But again, that's for something else. Let's
I want to I want to do a politic episode around February when Trump gets in, and I thought it would be funny that week is to do a CDH politic episode. I'd love to have you on for that and actually talk the brass tacks of politics. Right?
Yeah, I can talk about that.
No, for sure.
I can talk about that.
Yeah. Let's do that in another episode. So one more thing before I let you go. I've actually learned a lot, and that's why I did this podcast. So I'm gonna no particular order. I'm gonna name my best white cards, and I kind of want you to run off of why they're so good and powerful. You know, we got Smothering Tithe, Esper Sentinel, Silence, Ranger Captain, Grand Abolisher, Enlightened Tutor, Swords to Plowshares / Path to Exile, which we didn't even talk about today, which they're the best removal. Savine's Reclamation, Dranith, and my new favorite card in the last year, Delny. So can you kind of talk about those cards and why they're so strong and why they're probably the best top 20 cards?
Smothering Tithe, Esper Sentinel, both profit off of that incremental advantage.
Smothering Tithe is broken.
It's really broken in CDH because everybody is really greedy and likes to draw cards. Honestly, like, I've been playing, like, a ton of casual. I've been in games where people play Heuristic Study and Smothering Tithe and they don't do anything because people pay for them.
What's casual?
A lot of, like, a lot of Grixis players, like, oh yeah, pay for it so I can win the game because you're tapped out. That's actually not true in casual. Like, you pay for it and it's a dead card for your opponent. Nobody cares about paying extra for their taxes because it doesn't stop their game plan and they continue to play Magic and you don't get any cards. And honestly, those cards are better when your opponent doesn't pay taxes. Because if I wanted to play, like, a Sphere of Resistance or, like, or, like, some effect to discourage my opponent from drawing cards, it wouldn't really be a tax effect. Especially with how crazy mana gets in Commander now.
Well, I don't think Smothering Tithe and Heuristic Study are casual cards.
They're not, but the problem is that casual players... I mean, it's funny because as CDH players understand they're not casual cards. But casual players don't understand. They're not.
Well, you're
casual
not drawing
cards.
5 cards
Yeah.
in casual, winning the game with a combo most of the time.
Uh, most of the time,
Like my
but
Air
like
Dragon
high
deck, I'm
power.
just casting
Yeah.
dragons and attacking.
Yeah.
Like okay,
High-powered casual players are different, and
yeah,
it's weird because I feel like some CDH players are actually just high-powered casual players who are now playing CDH,
yeah.
right?
It's
They
so funny
don't
you say
think,
that.
yeah, they don't think competitively, and they don't
Yeah.
play their cards competitively. Like they know the combo lines,
Yeah.
but they don't know how to play around interaction. So the
Right,
moment they
right.
interact with them, they're just confused.
That's so funny. Last weekend we are at a store and we're talking to one of the store people talking about getting a CDH. Oh no, I don't play CDH. I play high power though. It's like the Esper Aloro or whenever you draw a card, deal damage to each opponent or whatever that was. And I'm okay,
Yakuza.
cool. Let me look at your deck list. Fastest Oracle, Ristic Study, Tainted Pack, Demonic Consultation. And oh no, I like winning. I just don't like. And I'm like, yeah, you're pub stomping your other people because they're not playing that. But you're not ready for us to have the Force of Wills and the Force Negations. I'm like, you're playing CDH, just not CDH. But the deck is probably 10 cards off of a CDH deck.
Again, it's the tempo play pattern because a lot of people already understand card advantage and card velocity, so they can play high powered and it feels competitive because they do that. But then the moment that they meet against tempo strategies where someone isn't focused on necessarily the card draw, but on this idea of like short circuiting you from winning the game, and then immediately taking the wind out of your sails and putting it into their own momentum to carry out the win. Like you tap out, I counter whatever shit you play, and then on my turn, I untap. You don't have counter magic ready because you're tapped out.
Yeah.
I'm going to now win out from under you because I now only have to play counter magic against 2 other players, right? And that's tempo right there.
Yeah.
Right?
All day long.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, Esper Sentinel, same thing, right?
Yep.
It's even more egregious because it comes down earlier than Smothering Tide.
Esper Sentinel's so good.
And the way that people's play patterns work is often this idea of like, hey, if I give you a card for Esper Sentinel, I get to play the rest of my hand, so I'm just going to do that. Which honestly is also a really great strategy in stacks decks because like you play the Esper Sentinel, you see the rest of the cards that they play, and you're like, all right, here's the Stony Silence. I know to play the Stony Silence now versus playing the Curse Totem or whatever.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Oh, I can't activate my Esper Sentinel. Damn.
Yeah,
Poke you for one, draw a card.
you encourage the Esper Sentinel encourages your opponents to actually play more cards just so that they don't continue to feed the Esper Sentinel, which gives you a lot of information about what stack space you need to play next against it,
Right.
or what you need to tutor to interact with what they have. On board.
Esper's really strong in an Esper shell. I love turn 1 Esper Sentinel in any Esper deck that I play because I'm big on Esper, if you haven't noticed. Because it's just like, okay, cool, don't pay for it or give me a couple cards, and then Esper Sentinel's going to draw you 5 to 10 cards in a longer game, and you're totally fine with that.
It's a Swiss Army knife. It gives you what you need to know, right? And also gives you a card for it
for 1 mana.
Respond. Yeah, to respond back to it.
Yeah.
And it also has a 1/1 body. It's a really great fodder to, especially in Esper with like Diabolic Intent or whatever you're running.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be as good if it was like an artifact or an enchantment. I think it being a 1/1 creature, and if you get it bigger, they're never paying for it. Like the deck.
It's an artifact creature, which is really great because now I can segue to Enlightened Tutor, which just tutors for Esper Sentinel. It also tutors for Ristic Study, tutors for Mystic Remora, it tutors for Underworld Breach. All-star cards that you're looking for.
Enlightened Tutor's a staple.
Yeah, it tutors for LED. It tutors for Urza Saga, which tutors for LED.
Almost
right?
anything.
If you're mana screwed, you can always use Enlightened Tutor to find Urza Saga, which honestly does so much for you because it sets you up to win with LED later anyway, and they can't even counter it at this point.
And mana rocks too, like Soul Rings and whatever.
Soul Rings, all this stuff.
Yeah.
It's a really great card to help fix whatever you have. Same goes with like Vampiric Tutor, but Vampiric Tutor tutors for anything. It's funny because like I played in a Azorius deck. It's really funny that you mentioned Tevesh because I played Tevesh last week.
Really?
I played Turbo Stacks.
It's my baby right here.
Yeah.
It's my baby.
Yeah, I played Turbo Stacks Tevesh. It was Rakdos Tevesh Zod.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that deck.
It's funny because I picked it up for the first time and I just borrowed it. I won that game, by the way.
Oh, it's so good. I love Tevesh anything. I'm looking at Tevesh Sidar deck, which it's fucking insane. Holy shit.
It's weird because I don't think I played it right or the way that the deck won or the person who built the deck wanted me to play it, but I played it my own way and it was
But you won.
very good. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I did the whole tempo approach. I waited for my opponents to play their cards, then I played the interaction.
Yeah.
Then I was always like one turn ahead of my opponents in everything that they were
Yeah,
doing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Every time I play with someone like you, like I played against Freedom Awful, just a casual game, and Spooky, he's a good. He plays a Panalaza, and like they keep like knowing what I'm doing before I do it, before I show I'm doing it, and they go, "Hey guys, I think we need to get rid of his Oppo because I think he's gonna run away with the game," and they were 100% correct, like 100%. Oh no, they hit me with the Oppo on my fetch land because that one extra mana was for something else. And I'm like, why would you do that? He's like, because you're the one in the win. And good players like you see that. Casual players are like, oh, what? Well, I didn't know to stop his fetch land because of this.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So the next one is like Ranger Captain and Silence.
Yeah, we
Ranger
talked about
Captain's great
those.
because
Yep.
it finds Esper Sentinel, it finds Walking Ballista.
Anything, yeah.
Yeah. It finds a lot of like really good 1 mana value cards, that creatures that you can think of that you would run in your deck.
Ballista, Esper.
Ballista,
Yeah.
it even finds a mana dork if you need it.
Yep.
And such.
Birds. Yep.
Yep. And what else? I mean,
Grand
if you need
Abolisher.
yeah, Grand Abolisher and Silence are very, very similar. And Silence stops, it's a really great bait card.
It's a
You can
good
literally,
bait. Yeah.
Yeah, you can just play it to bait your opponent and be like, hey, is this a good turn for me to win? If not, cool. I'm not going to do anything. Spend your interaction on
Or
this.
it's a good
I'm just gonna
defensive
pass.
card. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also a defensive card. Same with like Ranger Captive AOs, and you can play Grand Abolisher the same way too. Especially if you hit a surplus of mana, you untap with a bunch of mana.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah, you untap with a bunch of mana, and you play Grand Abolisher as your first spell immediately. That's the same way that you would play Silence. If you tap, and that's something that I forgot to mention. Depending on how you sequence your spells, tells your opponents a lot about things. Like if you develop a lot of your board and then you play Grand Abolisher, it usually tells your opponents, "Hey, I'm not trying to win. I'm just putting this guy down. You can kill it on your turn if you want." Right? And I think it's a very like insidious thing to do, especially if like you like play like a Rule of Law effect, right?
Yeah.
Afterwards or something like that, because you invite your opponent to kill it, but that's also inviting your opponent to time walk themselves. To kill it, right?
Right.
And you know that. Like as someone who plays like Rule of Law decks, I do that sometimes, literally because it's like in chess we call this a toxic pawn. You offer a pawn to your opponent.
I play chess. Yep.
Yeah. You offer it to your opponent, and you're like, it's undefended. Take it.
Take
right?
it.
It looks.
You want it. Yeah.
And then immediately it puts
Bishop.
your opponent at such a It puts it at a huge disadvantage, and they didn't even realize it. Right.
It was just
It's
a
really good
pawn, and now
positional
my
card.
queen's gone. Yeah.
Yep. And so you do it the same way in like more touch and go type of games where you, especially if you're not blue, where you don't have like that many flash speed interactions, and you're playing like this type of chess game where you're like, I'm going to move this piece up here and I'm going to see what you're going to do, because whatever you do with it, I'm going to untap on my turn and punish you really hard.
That's white all day. I feel like that's white.
Yeah.
It's kind of a give and take. Let me see what you do with this guy, or let me cast this guy, or let me do this and let me do that. Kind of see what you guys are doing, and then tempo.
Yeah, and again, it's only possible because you're playing tempo. You have to think like a tempo player.
Yeah.
Because if you try to do this without playing tempo, your opponent's just like, okay, whatever, I kill that and I'm going to win.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, like.
So we got
because I have a bajillion cards.
Yep.
Now
Swords and Path.
Swords and Path,
Best
like I said, best
removal
removal.
spells. Swords is on EDH Rec is the third most played card in Commander.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
I mean, it's very ubiquitous, and kind of like what we talk about with tempo again. Tempo is just really important to white, essentially. It's the main message.
That's what I learned.
Because like if I paid 5 mana for Crom, and like going back to the Sarah Angel example, it's 5 mana to cast Sarah Angel, 1 mana to cast Boomerang. It's 5 mana to cast Crom, 1 mana to just Swords to Plowshares.
Or Path. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really great Sword specifically, because Path can get you a basic, but if they're playing a 5-color deck, they don't really run any basics.
Right.
Back in the days when, it was literally like only a couple months
back
ago.
in my day,
when Jeweled Lotus was legal, right? It was such a huge, powerful tempo card, because now they can't even recast their commander immediately, right? Because they shortcut it.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's why that 1 mana was so powerful, is because your opponent could be dumping in Lotus Petals, J-Lo,
Yeah.
Moxins, like Mox Diamond, discard a land, Gemstone Caverns, exile card, just to get an early, like, 5 mana commander like Crom onto the battlefield, and you just answer it with 1 mana is such a power
I'm
move.
terrified of one
Yeah.
white mana.
Yeah.
I see a command tower up on the white blue guy, and I'm just like, fuck.
Yeah, it could be a swan
It could
song.
be anything.
It could be a silence. It could be anything because of that powerful 1 mana.
Yeah. How do you feel about a Savine's Wreck? I love that card.
Yeah, especially if you're on like breach combo lines. That is like one of the breach bread and butters. Especially if you're doing stuff like intuition and things like that. I think over time, Savine's Wreck has been. I stopped running it in my mono white decks.
Really?
Because it's actually too slow. And there used to be a really good play pattern for it in mono white decks where you can play like Lotus Field and then you just Savine's Wreck your lands back. You can Savine's Wreck like Ranger Captain Eos, for example, and tutor for another card, right? And like one thing that you can do is oftentimes you can play Ranger Captain Eos and you can tell your opponents, I'm not tutoring for a win, I'm just tutoring for like Esper Sentinel or way to protect. Or even if you have Esper Sentinel on the battlefield, you can play Ranger Captain Eos and you're like, I failed to find, I don't have anything in my deck. Right? But then you just straight up lied to your opponent because you had Walking Ballista in your deck, but you didn't want that heat from your opponent, right? So then what you do is that on your turn, you sacrifice Ranger Captive Eos, right? They don't see like the threat on the board, but then you cast Savine's Wreck, bring back Ranger Captain, find Walking Ballista, and then win the game. And yeah, it's a really good play pattern there because you've already cracked the Ranger Captain, and then you get Ranger Captain back, and at that point, they can't interact with it anymore.
Yeah, that's over. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Savine's Wreck. Like, I'm a big Esper guy, and you play in every red deck, every Jeskai deck. You play it in every Esper deck because it's just like, Thassa's Oracle. Okay, that gets countered. Okay, Savine's Wreck my Thassa's Oracle. Okay, the next turn. Okay, let me flash, or like in Tivit, it'd be like Time Sieve. Okay, counter the Time Sieve. Savine's Wreck Time Sieve. Okay, that got countered. Next turn, flashback Time Sieve.
Yeah, and the play pattern that you're talking about here, by the way, is a card advantage play pattern.
Yep.
Because it's the idea that I can reuse my card over and over again.
Yeah.
The reason why I don't play it is literally because of the tempo aspect of it. Like, I don't want to sit around trying to replay the same card when I could be playing other cards, moving myself forward, developing my board. Because whenever you play like this recursion effect, is if it doesn't have like that ETB writer that like gets you another card. By the way, I also run Torpor Orbs in my deck, so I don't really play ETBs either.
Okay.
Yeah.
Torpor is really strong right now with Torpor.
Yeah, ETB, because without Dockside, people think that ETBs are back on the table. And that's the issue, is that ETBs are back on the table. They're doing all other crazy stuff with ETBs now. Yeah. And so, again, you're not going to get any value off of it if you're trying to Savine's Wreck an ETB creature with a Torpor Orb in play. And so I'm really focused on this idea of like, okay, you've killed my guy, right? That means you spent your turn, you spent mana, you spent cards, right? Part of your turn, part of your resources to interact with what I have instead of trying to win the game.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Possibly because what I had was stopping you from winning the game. When I untap on my turn, I can put something else down that will scare the crap out of you, right? And I will continue to develop my board. I'll continue to attack, right? Savine's Wreck will get back whatever big boogeyman you had before, and that's great, right? But the issue is that oftentimes, as the board state develops, other things are on the table now that I also need to deal with. And the card that I played earlier was only there. I only played it because of what was previously on the table. So now I need something else to deal with whatever else is on the table. And that's sort of like, and so it's a rolling effect where you have to like think about your think about turn 1, think about turn 2, think about turn 3. If something from turn 1 that you played got killed, ask yourself on turn 4, is that turn 1 stacks piece still relevant?
Right.
Or should I be playing something else?
Right. Yeah, I totally get it. I guess everything's about tempo with you, and I guess that's why you're a good player. I'm terrified of seeing you in a 3-4 color deck. That's funny. So 2 more cards, and I'll let you go. Draneth and then Delny. I want your.
Yeah, Draneth is just really good. A lot of strategies in like we talked about Underworld Breach, Commander itself, plotting effects like Aven Disruptor, and and even like delayed blast fireball, which was like the hot tech back like a while back. Drannith just stops all of that. I think like it's crazy is because like when you think about it, there are so many. Again, this is like a testament to Magic and how it's played now because like card draw playing cards from your hand is not the only way you can play Magic. You can play cards from your graveyard. You can play cards from exile that you exile off the top of your library with impulse draw effects, right?
Peter's Grass, Oppos.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ob Nixilis does it too, right?
Yep.
Yeah, he's really, really good, and Drance just stops all of that.
Yeah, it stops a lot more than you think.
Yeah, it stops Dothy Voidwalker. It turns Dothy Voidwalker into a rest in peace for you, right?
Yeah.
Like one of the things that I didn't even mention about is how you can use your own stacks pieces to tempo off of other people's stacks pieces. Like I played against an Urza player before, and they did the whole Urza Winter Warp lock, right? And then on my turn, I was playing like the 4-mana Heliod, the OG Heliod that gives all your creatures vigilance.
Yeah.
Right? And so on my turn, I untapped and I play Static Orb. And the Urza player didn't think about it. And they're like, okay, cool, whatever. I'm still doing my Winter Orb thing. And so they tap down Winter Orb so that they can untap all their lands on their turn. But then when it got to their turn and they tried to untap all their lands, I was like, no, you can only untap 2 permanents. I have a Static Orb in play. And so he's like, okay, cool. Then I'll untap Winter Orb and I'll untap a land. And it's like, cool. Do you know what I just did to you?
Yeah.
I made you play Winter Orb like everyone else is right now.
Right. Yeah.
Now everyone is only untapping 1 land a turn because if you're going to tap Winter Orb again, you're only going to be untapping 1 land just like everyone else.
And that's why Urza was good is because he would play those 2 mana stacks pieces and he wasn't affected at all. Yeah. And now you just flipped it on him.
Yeah. People call it forcing back into parity, which is true. You force the player back to the same parity as everyone else. But I didn't use an asymmetrical effect. I used a symmetrical effect paired with someone else's symmetrical effect to create an asymmetrical effect for myself. Because I specifically mentioned this is the Heliod that gives all my creatures vigilance. My creatures don't have to tap to attack. I'm going to continue punching you in the face now. Right? And there's nothing you can do about it. If you tap your mana dorks, you can't untap them for your turn to hold up blockers.
Yeah.
Right.
And
if I'm like playing, yep, and like what I said about like the whole hate bears thing, everything just cascades into this type of thing now, where I'm just rolling you over, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Okay, I got you. Last card. Do you like Delny?
Last card is Delny. I actually haven't played Delny a lot, so
really?
I can't. Yeah, no, I never opened a copy of Delny, and my deck was stolen around the time when Delny came out.
Oh man, I'll just send me your address. I'll send you a card. You have to play. Delny is so strong. If it pairs with your commander, that's great. But a lot of times these decks, it'll pair with 6 or 7 cards in your deck. Like my Malcolm Timna deck. Archivist of Ogma, Esper Sentinel, Orcish Bowmaster. All these cards aren't my commanders. Also, it's both of my commanders. 2 Timna draws, 2 Malcolm triggers, right? Like, Delny is just...
Do you run Hatred, by the way?
Do I run what?
Hatred?
No, the 5 mana?
Yeah.
No, I thought about it. It's in the sideboard.
It's really good. If you, especially if you're running those silence effects with Delny.
Yeah.
The reason why I bring it up is because... all right, so here's the great part about Delny, that if I had a Delny and I was playing Esper, right? If I was playing like Malcolm Timna, right?
Yeah.
Right? One of the things that I would want to do is the idea of giving Timna Hatred and paying like 19 life into it to kill someone with lethal commander damage. Mm-hmm. Because the thing is that she can't be blocked with Delny in play.
With Delny, right? Yeah, that's what I was going to say. That's why she's good, too.
So after they don't declare blockers on Timna, you just cast Hatred. You make her a 21/21, and you just kill the player who's blocking her, the most problematic player on the table or whatever, right? And the thing is, she has lifeline. You get the life back, right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if I want to take 20 life. Yeah, no, I got you.
No, you just get the life back.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You get the life back. They're dead, right? You have one less player to deal with. And it's often, and the reason why I think this is pretty valuable is oftentimes players are like, man, I want to win, but the issue is this one
player.
This one player, or I'm dealing with 3 players. I can fight off 2 of them, but I can't fight off all 3 of them. Yeah, at the same time.
It's just 5 mana is kind of rough in a deck like that. But yeah, definitely.
But you have Malcolm. You get multiple treasures.
Right. For sure. Yeah. No, I'll definitely think about it for sure.
It's if you're playing like this kind of mid-rangey, kind of grindy game where you're just 100%. Accumulating value and your creatures are going in unblocked, right? And then you play Grand Abolisher or Ranger Captain, right? this is a really great way for you to like deal with something that's problematic on the table.
Yeah, you know that guy's gonna untap on their turn, and all I'm doing is drawing 3 cards with Timna, and you're just like, how can I deal with this? And it's like, oh, okay, I got you. I'll definitely consider it. But yeah, with Delny, I definitely think it goes in a lot of the decks that you're talking about, and it's the can't be blocked is really, really relevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would run it in Micaeus, honestly.
100%. You got to try it.
Yeah.
It's just one of those underrated cards where I didn't even think about it when I first saw it. And then I'm like, oh, okay, it doubles 7 of my creatures and both of my commanders.
I think the issues that a lot of people thought, like when people saw it, they only thought about doubling ETB triggers because there have been so many ETB doublers, right? That you didn't think about, oh no, this triggers on anything. Or this doubles any of your triggers. Like Derevi is a great Delny target as well. And
even doubling Esper Sentinel.
I played it, so I haven't played with Delny, but I have played against Delny. I actually played a mono black deck at a CDH tournament in Connecticut.
You know this is on the internet, right? Now you're not the mono white guy. You're the mono black guy.
I told you I was playing Tevish last week.
I know. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
I think it's funny is like people think that like I play mono white, but they don't realize like I could just pick up and play like any stacks.
You're a good player. Yeah. You're like, give me this Rakdos Tevish deck, and I'll smack people with it. You've been playing Magic forever.
Yeah, I mean, like, I understand how most decks work. I won't play as well as someone who's played it like for a huge portion of their time, but like I've had to play against these decks. Like I had to have known the lines for the decks.
I can imagine you on a blue farm or you on TNT, and you're like, I know how to play this fucking deck. I played against it a million times, and let me show you how to play it the right way.
Yeah. Well, actually, I played blue farm the wrong way with Dylan and Cam. I was at I think SCG Baltimore, and Dylan and Cam from Play to Win were there, and they let me borrow their blue farm deck. And they asked me like, how do you win with combat, right? And I was like, I'll just show it to you. And throughout the whole entire game, I like 3v1 the table with their blue farm deck, right? And never won with Adnos, Thoracle, or Consultation. I actually killed them all with combat damage.
With combat damage.
Yeah. And then Dylan and Cam was like, you drew like a bajillion cards at that point, right? Like, did you have it in hand? And it's like, yeah, I have Demon Consultation, Tainted Path, Thassa's Oracle, and Adnos in my hand, and I never played them.
I don't want to. That's another white card I wanted to talk about. Sarah Ascendant.
Oh yeah, I love Sarah Ascendant.
Oh my god, I love that card. People are sleeping on that card, dude.
Yeah, that card is great. I think people sleep on it because it actually doesn't do anything for their gameplay. Again, this is the tempo philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Sarah Ascendant in a combo deck doesn't do anything.
In a Timna deck, it's a slam dunk, I think.
In a Timna deck, it's a slam dunk. It advances your in a combat deck that focuses on counting your opponent's life total to 0. It is a powerful tempo card for that deck.
1 mana 6/6 lifelink?
Yeah.
Flying? Like what?
Yeah, to put this into perspective, it's 8 turns with that card on your opponent's life and they're dead. Just by that card alone.
Yeah.
Right? If you throw in Malcolm, you have now sped up that clock to 6 turns.
Yeah.
And then they're dead. Right?
Yeah.
Without them contributing anything to, or anyone else contributing to their life loss.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And they're going to be losing life indiscriminately anyway. Someone else might be playing Timna as well.
Right.
And so like they take 2 from their Timna, they take 8 from you. They've just lost like a quarter of their life total.
It's the best turn 1 play. I played Timna Sakashima for a while, and I had 3 Sarah Ascendants on the board, and they're like, don't you just have Thoracle in your hand? Yeah, but I'm winning with 3 Sarah Ascendants. I was at like 80 life, and I was winning just with those, and it was great.
Yeah. It's a great card, but again, I can definitely see why people don't want to run in their decks.
In their combo decks. Yeah, like Timna Thrasios doesn't play it.
Yeah. And it depends on like how you play too, because not everyone is like a combat aficionado or someone who cares about combat. One of the things that I've seen a lot with newer commander players is that they don't even know the steps in combat, right?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I didn't know either. And because CDH too, a lot of people don't know until you start playing Temna. You don't really understand. Oh, okay, damage, and then I'll flash and Spellmaster respond to Timna trigger. It's like you can't. You have to. It's upon resolution. A lot of people don't even know that.
Yep.
But But all right, man, I appreciate it. It's been 2 hours. My bad.
Yeah. No. I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I love it.
Hopefully you can edit all of this and all that stuff.
I'm putting it all in. This was great. I learned a lot. I got to get you on the politic episode. But it's...
Yeah, this was secretly an episode about tempo. I'm sorry about that.
That's great. Well, that's why mono white is good, or that's why white is good, is because of tempo. And I'm glad that we talked about it, because I feel like I hear last time I've seen a stack. To be honest, I saw Zephyr stack once in the last 6 months. It's because people don't know how to play tempo, and I love
stacks
that
decks
you said
are
that.
tempo decks
all day long. Yeah. But, all right, man. That's another episode in the books. Merry Christmas, everybody. That's white. Go play your mono white decks. That's the mono white guy, Charles. We'll see you guys later. Peace.
All right.